Welcome back to For All Kerbalkind. We're starting off this episode with taking a look at the contracts we have available to us, including the first satellite contracts, which are very, very profitable. Although we don't quite have the tech needed to actually complete these missions, and they are designed to be accepted ahead of time because of how much money they give you and how much time they give you, but I'm not going to go ahead and accept those quite yet. We'll probably do that next episode. Instead, we're shooting for contracts we know we can do just to slowly build our program up before we take the first leap. February 22nd, 1953. The second K-42 launch is readied, once again intent on conducting further experimentation with fruit flies in 0G, as well as throwing classified payload for the US Air Force downrange. In the early morning, the unguided rocket lifts off from the pad, arcing over the Gulf of Mexico. 1 minute and 18 seconds into the flight, the XLR-41 has burned through its propellant and jettisons its payload, which soars out of the atmosphere to later re-enter and safely return to the Earth via parachute. With another K2 success, we've got 44K funds now, so that was about 14K just from that downrange contract. Unfortunately, that was like the small contract. We got these two right here, which is with an advance of 7K, but a completion of 38 and 32. We're going to be doing this one, the low space bio experimentation contract first, because it's exactly what we just did, but with 65 less units of sounding payload, so we should get even further to get just a little bit more science out of it. And after that, we are going to be doing low space film return. So we're going to accept that contract, and I had initially, when we started this episode, built 2 of these, so this one's already 3% ready. What we want to do is go ahead and edit that one and get rid of 65 units of sounding payload to make it just a little bit lighter, because we only need 35. Alright, with that next K-42 being built, now what we have to do is figure out how to get this early film camera on board, which might need a redesign of, well, this procedural tank here, possibly. We'll see what we can do. March 24th, 1953. Peter K. has his shot at flying the Kel X-1 rocket plane, dropping from the wing of its carrier aircraft just shy of 8 kilometers above the Gulf. Surprisingly to the Foundation flight team and the other pilots monitoring the mission from ground control, Peter flies the X-1 smoother than the other 3 pilots had in the past. Not only this, but screaming through the atmosphere above Brownsville, Texas, Peter manages to break not 1 but 2 X-plane records this program has made for itself, flying faster and higher, reaching 900 meters per second at 17 kilometer altitude. Peter reports a maximum G-force endured of merely 3.1 Gs, surprisingly less than any previous flight. All 4 pilots now have had experience in experimental rocket plane flights, and the Foundation will be using the data and knowledge learned to push the X-plane program further in the future. The 4 pilots become household names as the Foundation begins to rise in popularity in the United States. success of that X1 flight, we have 63k funds, which I'm not sure I'm going to be putting into points quite yet. What we're going to do is upgrade the tanks of the X1 from steel to aluminum. But before we do that, let's take a look at the contracts we have, because now that we have, let's see, this one. After 2 completions, which we've now done, X-Plane's high contract will be available. So we have this one, reach 30 kilometers, which is the service ceiling of our current cockpit. We can't go higher than that without the Kerbal starting to suffocate. So we can do this, we can just barely reach that, and not go too high. 45 kilometers is definitely out of the question until we get an upgraded cockpit, which we'll take a look at where that is going to be. But taking a look at funds here, experimental rocket planes, 8k, 8k, X-Planes high, not 10k, 10k. That seems pretty nice. I'm wondering if it will let me do both of these. Let's accept X-Planes high. Yeah, it did not let me do it. Okay, so we have X-Planes high. That's what we're going to do with the X1. Let's see, we just have that and these because we have a K2 flight doing this, and then we'll have film return as well. But that's where we're at right now, so let's go ahead. The first thing that's going to happen here is, yeah, the vehicle recovery from the X1. So let's go ahead and get that recovered. It takes about 4 days. As soon as that's ready, we're going to switch our tanks over from steel to aluminum. We're going to get much higher thrust. We're going to be able to go much faster. We reach 900 meters per second. I have no doubts we can reach a kilometer per second up there in the atmosphere below 30 kilometers. So let's go ahead and edit the Kel X1. And I think we might just keep the name of the Kel X1, or we could change it to Kel X2 with the upgraded tanks and such. Okay, so here we are with the Kel X1. I just want to take a look. We do have an upgraded version of the engine as well. I actually didn't realize this. That costs 5,000 funds. Let's see what the difference is. ISP of 190 to 210, 208 to 225. It's the same thrust, but turbopump added to allow better performance and lighter tankage. We're gonna do that. We are going to upgrade our engine. These things can, like we just mentioned, burn for longer than I have fuel here. I only limited it due to the thrust weight ratio being sort of low, but we can make this longer probably. We go ahead and throw these wings where they would need to be. We now have a, well, long boy. I don't know if I like this. I don't know if I like the long boy. I'm gonna run it in a simulation and see what I think of it, I guess. Oh, what am I doing? As I expected, long boy, not an option. Okay, so the Kel X2 design works perfectly fine. It burns for a little bit over 3 minutes, is more capable than the X1 was. But real quick, something I noticed is we have an upgrade point available. So I'm actually going to buy another one down to 44k, oof, right? We're putting one in the VAB for rocketry, and then another one in the R&D, so we're at 10 and 12. So our tech will be just slightly faster, and so will our rockets. That is all. Now on to the K2 flight. May 10th, 1953. The final fully steel variant of the K4 series is rolled out onto the launch pad, intent on repeating the previous mission, this time with a slightly lighter payload than before. Despite this, after burnout of the first stage and separation of the payload, the K4 reached a lower apogee. It is assumed a slightly premature engine burnout occurred, though it is never known for sure. The mission ended up a resounding success as before, completing a low-space biological experimentation contract for the first time, now receiving funds for its proven capabilities. After the success of another K2 mission, it looks like, what I didn't realize is this is a series of 3 contracts to do low space biological experimentation. Awesome. And same with low space film return. And it looks like The only thing it does is possibly have you reach a greater altitude and have a little bit more sounding payload on board. So this one starts at reach 100 kilometers and 200 kilometers downrange with the film camera, and I think that will increase over time. And this one's just an altitude and a certain amount of sounding payload. So we're going to be able to do this one. We're going to upgrade the K42 with aluminum tanks, because that's tooled now. It's the same tooling as our low space film return, but we have 2 of these being built, and they're actually slightly more profitable. So we're gonna accept this one, and we're gonna try to do 3 of those, and then 2 more of those bio returns as well with the K4, and that'll net us some pretty nice funds. You see here, we're up to 80K. I think we had 40K before, maybe even less. So what we're gonna do is take 2 more points down to 43K. And we're going to put, let's see, 1 to the VAB and then 1 into R&D. We're keeping R&D 2 above. I kind of want to put more into the R&D than this, but I also really like the fact that we're getting a lot of funds. So I think next time I might put 2 into R&D. Not sure about that. But next up we have another Kel X2 flight, and then we have more K4 flights with film returns. All right, it looks like the Kel X2 is going to take 17 days to mount to the carrier. But before that happens, 3 days before, we have a K43 flight ready to go. Although we'll see, honestly, how long that'll take to roll out. These are happening right around the same time. Let's find out. It might take, I think it's going to take about a day or 2, which is still going to be before the Kel X2 is ready, possibly. It's going to be close. It's going to be close. Roll out 2 days. To 4 hours beforehand. So these are happening on the exact same day, it looks like. That's kind of neat. All right, let's roll that out onto the pad. This has our photography experiments, and then warp to morning, and I think we might do the Kel X2 before we do this, but I might roll this out onto the pad just to have it there so we can land and then, have the rocket in the background. I think that would be kind of neat. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's mount this to the carrier, and then warp to early morning on July 27th. A nice coincidental launch of 2 missions. Cool. Let's get on with it. July 27th, 1953. Gerald, inspired by Peter's previous accomplishments, is assigned an X2 flight to push the altitude boundaries of the aircraft. Below 30 kilometers, the breathing system operates nominally, but above that point it is not rated to perform very well. Knowing the risks and possible discomfort involved, Gerald is detached from the carrier and soars into the sky, attempting to ever so slightly breach the 30-kilometer altitude mark. The flight carries on nominally as Gerald calls out altitude marks to flight control at the KSC. Around 2 minutes into the flight, he reports stability of the aircraft is slipping, but decides to push further, determined to complete the mission. Approaching 30 kilometers altitude, control surfaces are near unresponsive as they are not rated for high altitude flight. The aircraft violently jerks into a dead spin as Gerald lights and relights the engines in a desperate attempt to push himself the few hundred meters shy of his goal, but is unsuccessful. The ground team watches in horror as Gerald struggles to regain control, now plummeting to the surface from 29 kilometers altitude. On the way down, Gerald hears pieces of the aircraft begin to rip apart, but decides not to bail out as his control surfaces are beginning to grip the air again. He is miraculously able to level out the aircraft once in the denser atmosphere and reports back to the KSC. "I've got control again. I have control. There's a bit of a roll. I think part of the tail tore off. I think I can, yes. Flight, I can fly this back. Holy f***, that was bad. I'm coming home." 10.5 minutes into the flight, the ground team watches as the Kel X2 limps towards the runway at speeds exceeding a safe landing. Gerald reports that applying full landing flaps could destabilize the delicate situation he currently finds himself in, attempting to glide through the air in a broken aircraft. The KSC receives a short message before touchdown. "I'm not going into the drink. I can bring this down. Easy now, easy. Roll is fighting a lot now, easy." Flight watches as the aircraft touches down on runway 90. Moments later, the right wing touches down and rips away from the aircraft, which disappears into a pile of dust, fire, and debris. The parachute never deploys, and Gerald does not survive. It's difficult to bounce back from something like this, but we do have to investigate why what happened. So let's just take a look. This is sort of where we were at. We were about this much fuel, I'd say, when we lost control at that altitude. Velocity indicator, right. Completely forward, right? But if we go to 2.6, it's suddenly this way? I'm very confused about that. So I don't really know if I can trust this window with this aircraft. But what I do know is we need more yaw for this craft, which is very easy to do. All we have to do is bring this up like so. A much larger tail wing. What does this say? I'm curious if this changes anything. A little bit. It still says we're having yaw roll issues. But Mach 2 at 30 kilometers is perfectly stable. 29, 28. So this just might be alright. We're gonna roll a simulation of this because this will cost a lot less than adding reaction control thrusters will. So let's go ahead and do that. Alright, final flight tests prove that having this yaw much taller actually really increases stability at that altitude. I was able to reach 30 kilometers in the simulation, and despite not having really all that much control, we were able to ride the prograde vector rather than side slipping and going into a dead spin. So this mission is once again go for the 30 kilometer mark. Hardly 30 kilometers. Like 31, 32 kilometers is really pushing it. The pilot didn't black out, but it got really close. So this Kel X2 is going to go into construction now. We're going to save it and build it. And we have Peter, Milton, and Eileen able to fly this. And now that it's actually tested and rated for that upper atmosphere, I have a full confidence in the abilities of our pilots and of this vehicle. I'm actually going to close the game and make a little for Gerald note on the aircraft right above the wing, just to sort of commemorate him for his services and his bravery. So let's move ahead because we have some more launches left to do this year. The K-43, a new variant of Project Black Powder's newest series of unguided rockets, had been rolled out onto the pad the night before Gerald's fateful flight took place. Gerald wanted to return from his flight to watch the launch soon after. However, due to recent events, the launch is initially rescheduled to wait until the following day, out of respect. It is later decided at a ceremony in the late afternoon dedicated to the pilot that they will launch the rocket at its conclusion just after dusk. All present unanimously agree it would have been what he would have wanted. All watch in silence as the K-4 lifts off from the pad, soaring over the Gulf, glowing a bright white in contrast to the dark sky above. The admittedly blurry pictures of Earth from space later recovered are a bit disappointing, and it is clear a method of stabilizing the camera before utilizing it is going to be essential to bring back any sort of useful image from space. Deciding between these two, the low space bio experiment and the low space film return, it looks like this one wants us to go to 150 kilometers, which is not an issue, downrange of 400 kilometers. I actually don't know if the K43 is able to reach 400 kilometers downrange, but this one gives us like 5,000 more than the bio experiment, and we already have one being built anyway, so we're going to accept this and hope for the best. This X-Plane supersonic flight, right now it says we are to hold 680 meters per second, around 12 kilometers, which isn't an issue to reach that speed. The issue is maintaining that speed for a total of 3 minutes. I'm not sure if we're quite able to do that with the X2. But regardless, I'm not going to accept it quite yet because we do have to complete this X-Plane's high contract. And yeah, we're going to intend on doing that. We're not canceling it, no. So up next we have another flight of the K43, and I'm actually going to have another K42, this time with aluminum tanks built for the low space bio, which we'll do after this next K4 launch. Also, after completing some contracts, we have a plethora of funds, so I think I'm going to dump 3 points. Let's see, we got 1, we're going to put 1 into the VAB, and we're going to put 2 into R&D. So VAB is at 12, R&D is at 15. And our tech's going to go just a little bit faster again, as well as our rockets here. This one went down 4 days for that 1 point. So the K43 next, and then the K42. I'm hoping the K43 can complete its mission. K42 is definitely able to. And that will get us even more funds, which will be put into even greater speeds as we start to unlock actual technology. Alright, just to make sure that our Kel X2 has another flight to attempt the 30K mark before the end of the year, so we fit it in this episode, I went ahead and spent 1 point in spaceplane hangar upgrades in the KCT as well. October 5th, 1953. Another K43 is rolled out onto the launch pad, intent on again recovering photographs of the Earth from just above the atmosphere. On board is a propulsive mechanism to spin stabilize the rocket a bit over 1 minute into the flight, and then revert this rotation before jettisoning the camera, intent on capturing images in a much more stable fashion than the previous launch, which left the camera spinning wildly. The rocket launches successfully, and the spin stabilization works as intended, leaving the payload relatively still on its suborbital trajectory. The photographs recovered from this launch are dedicated to Gerald and the other Foundation pilots for risking their lives on this endeavor into space. We've also heard word that back in late August, the Soviet Union has also lost one of their test pilots, so both nations, both programs are grieving together over the loss of a Kerbal, over the loss of a pilot, humbled in the knowledge that exploring space is very dangerous, and united in the drive to push ahead regardless. Alright, another successful launch. Low space film return. Looks like we're able to do it again with the K43 if we so desired. We probably reached 600 kilometers downrange, and we definitely got over 200 kilometers altitude. So we could probably accept this one once we have another K3 being built. But we won't be getting any science from it since we completed all of these science experiments on board for low space over, well, the ocean. So maybe there's something else we can do. We can maybe angle it a different direction, although that might lead to complications. We don't want to drop the rocket on anyone's house. So our K42 is going to be the last launch of a rocket this episode, and we're going to accept this contract because this is what I built it around, 75 units of payload, reaching that altitude, and we've got some science experiment on board. Yeah, we're going to go ahead and accept that and launch it. December 24th, 1953. Christmas Eve in Brownsville, Texas. Eileen insists on attempting the mission Gerald had flown several months prior. This time in a Kel X2. Technology in the oxygen system at high altitudes have not yet improved, but the design of the aircraft now allows for much better control at that altitude. A few hours after breakfast, Eileen takes off strapped to the wing of the carrier and is let go to attempt this daring feat. Upon ignition of the dual XLR-11s, the leftmost engine immediately fails. Eileen shuts down the right engine before the aircraft yaws uncontrollably and attempts to relight them both, which she does successfully. The Kel X2 is put into a steep climb which naturally shallows out as the atmosphere becomes less and less dense. This also leads to control surfaces becoming less stable as well, which is most evident upon reaching the desired altitude mark of 30 kilometers. Eileen struggles to hold the aircraft steady as she shuts down the engines and holds her breath for the longest 20 seconds of her life. Reaching 32,274 meters at 1,250 meters per second, Eileen has blown previously set records for the program out of the water. Finally diving back down to lower altitudes, the aircraft becomes controllable, Eileen can breathe normally, and the X2 glides back to runway 90. Due to the distance traveled, she just barely makes it back to the KSC with almost no margin for error, and touches down, bringing the Kel X2 to a halt. No structural damage is reported, and Eileen does report despite the intensity of the flight, the maximum G-forces endured was 2.9 Gs, relatively graceful all things considered. As soon as the X2 flight has concluded, Eileen joins ground control in watching a K-42 launch another fruit flies experiment into a suborbital trajectory. This rocket has been improved structurally to minimize tumbling after the engine burns out, and due to the nature of the rather fragile experiment, spin stabilization is not even considered. The K-4 experiences no failure during this launch, and the experiment is recovered successfully from the Gulf of Mexico. Although living with the unfortunate reality of an empty seat this holiday season, Foundation staff celebrate the success of another year. Christmas Eve in Brownsville, we've completed some successful flights, and right now our program is sitting at 38.5 spare science, 94K spare funds, and this is definitely going to be utilized towards building a new rocket next episode. This science is going to be invested in, well, things that we decide on later. Next episode, we'll decide on all of those things, as well as some next missions and all that good stuff. We do have some artwork for the series made by Lord Plavis on the Discord. If you have any artwork of your own you'd like to share, feel free to hop in the Discord linked below and send submissions to the artwork channel. It's totally up to you, but it'd be cool to show your things here. If you'd like to see what Beardy has been up to with his Soviet space program, a link to his video and his channel should be in the description as well as on the end screen. And I want to thank you guys so much for watching, and peace out.